and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. It's 18th of April 2015. This is UCY.TV with the Solvinur Event. How you doing, everybody? And my first question is there anybody out there? If you are, go to ucy.tv, then mouse over shows, click on any of them. You will find there a link to the chat room. And the chat room is ucyradio.chatango.com. I'm not sure that will get you there because there's a slash behind it, but it's grayed out, so we'll probably get some version HTML5 or Flash, and let me know if you're listening. I just hate it when nobody's listening. That doesn't make for good radio. Especially not since this is live radio, if you're not listening to YouTube or some download somewhere. So last week I wasn't there. Problems with the cat. And I was just unable to make radio at that point. The week before that, we had Neil online. Let's see. From realitybitesradio.com. I've already had one comment back on that by Peter, who was approving of what happened on the show. We covered lots of topics, he said. So, thus far though, the chat seems to be dead. Some Anon came in. Hello, Anon. It says that there's Jules Road. That was the cat. You've heard that. Myself, Vincent, and 2 Anons. So that's not a lot of people. Especially not if they seem AFK-ish. Yeah. The plan for today was to continue with where we left off 3 weeks ago, I guess. With the most dangerous superstition by Larkin Rose. Unfortunately, I will have to guess where we were at because somehow the PDF reader now decided to not remember where we were the last time I opened it, probably due to some update or something. And that's why I had to guess that we were at forced benefits. This is one of the headings of the next paragraph. So I'm guessing we should continue from there. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat room. I'll try and keep an eye on that and answer if possible. No aesthetic penance today, Dan. Vedas are not on the list for today. First we have to finish this. It's going to take a while before we even consider getting back to some Mahabharata. I was not impressed by the couple of shows that I did on that. It was really boring at some points. That's because I didn't know what to expect myself. I was kind of driven for reading it by the movie. It's a 5.5 hour or 6 hour movie out there called The Mahabharata by Peter Brooks. Now that is a good story. You will be there's not one moment of boredom in there. You have to keep your attention focused all of the time. And that's a very good story. Though thus far, when reading from the Mahabharata, we haven't even heard one bit of information that would come back in the movie. Although I'm sure that the movie is accurate representation of what is discussed in the Mahabharata, but the Mahabharata is so big that we just haven't come to any of those parts yet. A lot of people in India take the Mahabharata not to be just a story. They think it's history, factual history, which is kind of odd since it's full of mythological fairy tales, I would say, of which you don't see anything like that happening today. And of course there's no reason to assume that all of a sudden all of these miracles just stopped happening. Right? So we have no reason to assume that all of these miracles did happen at some point in the past. I still think it's interesting though to read this stuff. The crowd picks up in the second hour, Dan Cooper says in the chat. Is that so? Why? Is everybody still asleep? Yeah. I can imagine that. It's kind of early, you know, still in the United States. The base from where we make radio. It's 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. in the Netherlands. Well, it's already 9 minutes past, but that's when we start. It's been a beautiful day here in the Netherlands. Lots of sunshine. Don't know about the rest of the Netherlands, but here it was like 20 plus centigrade. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. I think something like 37 or so. No, not 37. Let me check that. Oh, let's see. What is that in Fahrenheit? Oh, 20. Let's see, 70. All right. So that's 70 degrees like Fahrenheit. That's a good temperature. The strawberries are already starting to grow. Even some flowers already. So that means in like 6 to 8 weeks or so, I shall be picking strawberries from the garden. Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Sweet. That will be 70, 67. All right. Yeah, and it's a lot warmer in where I'm at because I'm kind of protected by a large building against the wind. So the sun has. I'm on the south, it's full sunshine. So it's probably a bit colder at other places, but it's very good at my place. So unless you guys in the chat room want to hear something else, that's possible too. I can just close this and pick it up at another time. But I'm going to do this if nobody minds. Continue the Larkin Rose PDF called The Most Dangerous Superstition, which is, as you probably know, the belief in authority. The heading is Forced Benefits. Hey Wood, how you doing? What's up, buddy? Statists often defend taxation by arguing that the forced confiscation of wealth by government becomes retroactively justified when some of the confiscated money is spent in a way that benefits the one from whom the money was taken, or at least benefits society in general. Morning, Hecti. Long time no see, buddy. For example, a statist might argue that if someone drives on a road that was funded in part by money taken from that person, or indirectly benefits from others being able to use the road, then that person should not complain about having been taxed to fund it. Ignoring the true nature of the situation, statists mischaracterize this as simply paying for services. Right? I will argue immediately that it's unasked for, right? If I don't ask for roads to be built, then you shouldn't be taking money from me to build roads, right? No one would, not even asking money, right? No one would make a similar argument when authority is not involved. Exactly. Right? If your neighbor comes to you and says, "Oh, I need some money because roads need to be built," you're going to look at him strangely and ask him if he's stupid, right? Suppose, for example, that a restaurant delivered a meal to someone who had not ordered it. Yeah, exactly. And then sent over armed thugs to collect $100 from that person. If the person, after being extorted in that way, chose to eat a meal, no rational person would argue that that would make the restaurant's actions morally acceptable. Yet this is exactly analogous to the usual view of statists, that if someone benefits from government services, he should not complain about taxes. The unstated premise is that the legal robbery is perfectly legitimate as long as authority afterwards provides some benefit to the one who was robbed. Alright, so another example to make this point clear is that, let's say for instance, if I go to my neighbor and I tell my neighbor, you have to give me 100 euros or dollars, whatever, and I tell her that some of this money is going to go to the poor, some of this money is going to infrastructure, some of this money is going to teachers for schools, and some of it is going to the fire department, and some of it I'm gonna keep myself, because, you know, I got a lot of work to do distributing all this money. She would consider that stealing, right? I stole $100 from her. But as soon as it's government, you know, then she has no problem at all. Then it's okay. Then it's, in Dutch it's called belasting, taxes, right? That's kind of the example I could give. And it seems to make little difference to statists whether such a benefit is only indirect or is horrendously expensive, or is combined with all sorts of other things which do not benefit the person at all, or which the person morally opposes. Example given, funding the war, or abortion, or some religious or anti-religious agenda. This is because statists believe that ultimately it is the prerogative? What's that? I don't understand that word. It says prerogative, but I'm guessing that should be prerogative or something. Let me see what Google tells us about this word, guys. Google, paste. Prerogative. It is indeed prerogative, as I read it anyway. In law, a prerogative is an exclusive right given from a government or state. What do you mean from? Isn't it to? And invested in an individual group, an individual or group. Alright, let's try this again. In law, a prerogative is an exclusive right given from a government or state and invested in an individual or group. So a prerogative is a right, it says. But what is it? It's a right given to a specific group, I guess. The content of which is separate from the body of rights enjoined under the general law of the normative state. It was a common facet of feudal law. The word is derived from French prerogative, 14th century, special right. From Latin, something like that, previous choice or election. Originally with tribus centuria, or until a unit of 100 voters who by lot voted in the first Roman comitia. Alright, prerogative. Know a little bit more about that. Special rights. Alright. This is because statists believe that ultimately it is the prerogative of those in authority, not of those who earned the money, to decide how wealth should be spent, and that, as long as the ruling class claims to be robbing and controlling the people for their own good, the peasants have no right to resist whatever coercion and violence the master deems necessary. Alright, next heading. Violence for protection. An offshoot of the notion that government providing benefits retroactively justifies all manner of theft and extortion is the patently ridiculous argument that it is necessary for the people to be forcibly controlled and robbed so that government can protect them from the bad people who might otherwise forcibly control and rob them. Yeah, it's insane, right? This absurd, contorted rationalization is quite common, whether the discussion relates to an authoritarian military or domestic law enforcement. And then it says dot, usually when the word whether... Oh, yes, I was going to say or. Where's the or? Whether the discussion relates to an authoritarian military or domestic law enforcement. And statists rely on fear-mongering to bolster such lunacy, making dire predictions about all the unpleasant things they theorize would occur if the people were not forcibly robbed via a massive authoritarian extortion racket. I'm wrong, it's pre. Yeah, I thought it was prerogative, like P-E-R, but it's P-R-E. Me too, sweet. Yeah, stupid, huh? Again, such silly arguments are never made in situations where authority is not involved. No one would accept a claim that it is okay for a restaurant to force someone to pay for food he did not order. Yeah. On the same, I had this discussion on my work also. This was about healthcare. And I said, well, this doesn't make sense. You shouldn't be forced to enter in a contract with some insurer to, make sure that you can pay for things that you need when you have to go to the doctor. Most of the people that I was with there did not think like that, and they even came with the argument, in the United States they didn't have that, and now they have Obamacare. And I said, well, how do you know that they didn't have that? I said lots of people were insured, but it wasn't forced on them. And they were like, oh? I said, yeah, there were about like 50 million or so people that didn't have insurance. And now they are forced to pay, even though, for whatever reason, they didn't pay these monies to insurances before the Obamacare was in. All right? So I've it's okay if you want to pay for health care to some insurer. If you want to do that, fine, be my guest. But you shouldn't be forced to. Right? I disagree with the whole idea to begin with. I mean, why would there be an insurer in between the person that needs health care and, let's say, for instance, a doctor? Right? Why would there need to be an insurer in between that? All it does is raise the price because the insurer has to make money also. So he should be out of the picture totally, in my opinion. Right? Continuing, on the grounds that otherwise the person might starve. No one would accept the claim that it is okay for a builder to force someone to pay for a building he did not order, on the grounds that otherwise the person might be homeless. But even more ridiculous would be to claim that it is okay for one street gang to run a protection racket so that they have the resources to keep all the other dangerous street gangs out of their city. Yeah, thank you, Dan. Yet that is exactly the attempted justification for all government, that it must be allowed to commit aggression against everyone, so that it can protect them from others who might commit aggression against them. Supporters of a strong police force or a powerful military, both of which are funded via forced confiscation of wealth, have accepted the premise that it is not only okay but necessary for people to be oppressed, controlled and extorted by government as long as it is done for their own good. Oh, is that even a Dutch word? Prerogatief? Never heard of that Dutch word. We learn something even now, Ruud, in Dutch, right? Prerogatief. Well, we would just say voorrecht, right? Yeah. The fact that authoritarian protectors fail to prevent crime or war and instead dramatically increase, both via warmongering and creating illegal markets, seem to go unnoticed by those who advocate the defense via government. Again, it is only because authority is imagined to have the right to commit aggression that anyone would ever make the insane argument that it is proper to initiate violence against people in order to protect them. Yeah, that's just insane, isn't it? It's ridiculous. Next heading. When in doubt, advocate violence. Yeah. Much of the time, people will even advocate a forcibly imposed authoritarian plan simply because they are not sure what would happen if they did not, or are not sure how something would be accomplished if people were left in freedom. For example, if someone has a hard time picturing how a completely private road system would function, he will usually advocate a government plan funded by coercion. If he is not sure how well free people could defend themselves without a standing army, he will likely advocate an authoritarian military solution funded by coercive taxation. Those who believe in government advocate violence by default. All it takes is a little uncertainty and ignorance to cause the average person to advocate a coercive government plan for just about anything. This is not how people behave in their day-to-day lives. The average person does not go around initiating violence against everyone he meets because he is not sure that everyone he meets will otherwise behave properly and make the right decisions. Yeah. What comes to my mind lately, is because lately I've been against the advice of my philosopher friend. I've been studying some topics regarding philosophy. And I found out that there's 2 things to begin with. There's 5 things, I'll tell you all 5. But you have to start with 2 things to begin with if you want to set up a philosophy of your own. Right? The first one is metaphysics, which means the nature of the universe. Then you have to have an epistemology, which means that you have to be able to explain how do you know things. This is just a short version, right? You could say lots and lots more about both of those. But that's the very short one, right? Out of those 2, out of your metaphysics and out of your epistemology, rises an ethics. Right? Ethics means how should you behave? And I don't mean what are your manners, like table manners or something like that. No, it means what is the nature of man, right? Let's take, for example, a tiger, right? The ethics of a tiger is you have to hunt to eat. So for a man, it goes that it needs to survive also. But it doesn't hunt anymore, like we used to. We use reason for survival. Right? The tiger doesn't have reason, we do. And this is the thing that makes us human, and therefore a human ethics differs from an animal in the sense that we use reason to guide our actions. All right? And these actions have to make sure that we survive. That's it. That doesn't have anything to do with table manners or how well you are dressed or how you address other people. You know, you forget about all that. Then there's two more that split from ethics, which is polyethics, which is another word for politics. Poly meaning many, and ethics I just explained. Well, then they just, tie it to a whole group of people. And aesthetics, all right, the nature of what is beautiful. I don't really care for the last two. The first two for me are much more interesting. Metaphysics and epistemology. What is the nature of the universe and how do you know what you know? Also known as theory of knowledge. Right? Epistemology is also theory of knowledge. All right. So if people would just have their own philosophy, they wouldn't need to be told what to do. You understand? Because it would flow automatically from their metaphysics and epistemology. Alright, moving on. Hey Captain Proton, what's up? But that is precisely what most statists do via government. They advocate the widespread forcible control of millions of human beings simply because they are not entirely sure that people, if left in freedom, would spend their money the way they should, treat others the way they should, find peaceful, effective solutions to problems, etc. Alright, here's another point that I would like to point out, which Larkin Rawls already pointed out, but I think bears repeating. Because it's insane, right, to claim that, well, I'm not sure that people are going to act as they should, so we're going to pick a random group of these people and let them tell us how we should act. That's insane. It's contradictory in itself. Because you cannot know that these people that you that represent us, right? How can you know that they know how people should act if you don't believe in the first place that people, don't act as they should? Continuing. By way of the superstition of authority, statists can comfortably advocate the violent subjugation of their neighbors, simply because they are not quite sure how their neighbors would otherwise behave. And those who crave power exploit that fact to their advantage. All the politicians need to do in order to get support for an authoritarian power grab is to tell the public that things might not work very well if he left the people in freedom. He does not even need to wait until someone actually does something dishonest or malicious, or negligent, or otherwise destructive. All he has to do is suggest the possibility that if the people are left in freedom, bad things might happen. Yeah, fear. That's one of the basic weapons used to mind control people. Right? Because advocates of government... Wait a minute, this sentence doesn't make sense to me. How do I read this, guys? Because advocates of government... like that. Because advocates of government violence, right? So that's the violence of the government, do not recognize law as violence. The threshold at which they will support an authoritarian coerced solution is very low. Those who crave power can simply suggest that some plan might help someone somewhere, and many people will condone legal violence based upon that premise alone. Now, what this reminds me of is also something that kind of bothers me when I talk to other people. Other people, right? That's putting it very, very mildly. Is that they complain and complain, government this and government that, and it just doesn't dawn on them that it's all on purpose, because they still have this strange idea that government is there for them, that government wouldn't hurt them, that government is benevolent, right? So they start complaining, this wrong, that wrong, sister wrong. Sister wrong. You probably never heard that expression in English. We say that in Dutch. Zo wrong, sis wrong. Sis is sister. Anyway. So they just keep complaining, which is fine by politicians. They love it when people complain. It shows how ignorant they are. A lot of government violence is based upon guesses about what might happen as a result of what people might do. For example, much of the state coercion done in the name of environmentalism is based upon the idea that the state must forcibly control the choices of everyone, because otherwise people might make choices that contribute to global warming. Yeah, if you still believe that crap. The end of the rainforests, the extinction of animals, and so on. Alright? The Earth has been warming since the end of the last ice age. Yeah. It's been going on for quite some time. I think like 12,000 years about. Right? And it's good that happened, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to grow food as we do now. Few people acting on their own would commit aggression based upon a guess about possible indirect consequences of the non-malicious, non-violent actions of others. And by the way, I mentioned that global warming 12,500 years ago it started. This has to do with the sun, not with activities of man. Right? Yet that is commonplace in government policy. As another example of advocating government violence by default, consider the practice of forcibly preventing foreigners from setting foot anywhere in an entire country without the written permission of the ruling class of that country. Such immigration laws create something akin to the war mentality, where an entire demographic category of people is criminalized and demonized and subjected to acts of aggression based upon concerns about what some of those people might do. People opine that many illegals are criminals or come into the country just to receive benefits. Regardless of how often such allegations are accurate, the result is that all illegals, anyone who is in the country without the permission of the politicians, are forcibly controlled. Alright. Here in the Netherlands, they have that discussion also. Supposedly, they're trying to fix a government made up of a right-wing party called the VVD and a left-wing party called the PVDA. And they say, can you imagine what they... this is in the news, right? This is what the puppets are playing. And they assume that people actually care about this stuff. And believe me, people do. They're talking about what should happen to the people that have come here from outside as refugees, for instance, and have gone through the process of deciding whether they can stay here or not. You know, they go to the proper authorities, say, I'm such and such, and I come from there and there, and I would like to stay here, right? So they've gone through all of those steps, and then the government decides that they cannot stay here for whatever reason, right? And then the VVD says, well, these people should be deported. And the PVDA says, well, no, we should keep these people here in the Netherlands. This is the kind of nonsense that they talk about at the Dutch political level. Alright, where were we? This is the result of the pack mentality, guilt by association. It should go without saying that using violence against one person because he is of the same race, or from the same country, or in some other way similar to someone else who has actually caused harm, is utterly unjustified. Of note, the attempts by government to quell illegal immigration, that illegal immigration is in quotes, also result in aggression being perpetrated against many legal residents, as well as illegal, at border patrol checkpoints, many of which are not even at the border. To stop and question everyone driving down a road because someone might be there illegally is precisely the kind of unjustified aggression commonly committed by government agents and rarely committed by anyone else. This violence by default can also be seen in the intrusive searches and interrogations of anyone who attempts to fly on a plane in the land of the free. For the owner of a plane to put conditions on anyone who wants to ride in his planes, and this would also apply to a train, a car, or anything else, is very different from a third party forcibly preventing anyone from riding or on any plane. I guess that should be flying in any plane, anywhere in an entire country, unless the would-be passengers first subject themselves to questioning, searches of their luggage, and even strip searches of themselves by the agent of the third party. Excuse me. People would never tolerate any private individual behaving this way, with the attitude of, I'd better force my will on everyone else just in case. But for the agents of authority, the tactic is commonplace, and many people imagine it to be legitimate. In fact, they often demand that authority do such things. Yes. In their day-to-day lives, non-violence is the default type of behavior for most people. While there are occasional physical conflicts, most people go to great lengths to avoid them, not only by trying not to start a fight, but also by trying to defuse tense situations. Even when a fight does occur, both sides usually end up walking away. Each day, billions of people find ways to peacefully coexist, even when they have significantly different viewpoints, beliefs and attitudes. But that is their personal lives. When it comes to the politics, violence is the default. Every voter, to one extent or another, seeks to have his own views and ideas forcibly inflicted upon everyone else, through the mechanism of government. The default is not to let others do their own thing, or try to get along peacefully. The default is to advocate aggression against absolutely everyone by way of the authoritarian coercion called law. There is a mind-boggling, huge disconnect between what the average person views as civilized behavior on an individual basis and what he views as legitimate and civilized when it comes to the actions of authority. It is difficult to imagine anyone behaving in his personal life the way voters behave when it comes to politics. Such a person would constantly be robbing other friends and strangers alike of huge sums of money to fund things he deems important, as well as using threats, physical force, and even kidnapping to coerce others into making whatever decisions he thinks would be best for his victims or for society in general. In short, anyone who acted in his private life the way all statists act in the political arena would be immediately recognized as a thug, a thief, or a lunatic. But doing exactly the same things via government, advocating mass extortion and thuggery, is accepted by most as something that normal civilized people should do. In fact, they sometimes refer to voting as a duty, as if it is actually immoral to not advocate the coercive control of one's neighbors. Amazingly and ironically, the only people who do not advocate constant widespread violence and coercion via government, anarchists and voluntarists, are usually viewed by the majority as being weird, uncivilized and dangerous. Alright. We're up to the next heading, guys. How the myth defeats virtue. Almost all parents routinely send their children to, and that is TWO, two completely contradictory messages. One, it is inherently wrong to steal, hit, bully, etc. And it is it is good to obey authority. Almost everything that authority does constitutes bullying, using violence or the threat of violence to control the behavior of others and to take their property. Every authority figure, from a school teacher to the dictator of a country, not only coercively controls his underlings on a regular basis, but also speaks and acts as if he has the absolute unquestionable right to do so. So the teacher is always forcibly imposing his will on the students, while at the same time telling them that it is wrong for them to forcibly impose their will on others. It is the ultimate example of the hypocritical message, do as I say, not as I do. If children were raised with the idea that it is inherently wrong to steal, hit, bully, etc., why would there be any societal need for them to also be taught respect for authority? It only trains them to be easier to manage and control, which is of benefit to those who seek dominion over them, whether parents, teachers, or politicians. but does not train them to be any more civilized, compassionate, or humane. It does exactly the opposite, as the Milgram experiment demonstrated. Alright? So if you still are unfamiliar with the Milgram experiment, go look that up now. It's more important. It's MILGRAM, Milgram experiment. In short, children are taught how to be civilized human beings and then taught an insane superstition which overrides and renders obsolete everything they were taught about being civilized. This bizarre paradox can be seen all over the place in modern society. The average person would feel shame and guilt if he stole $100 from his neighbors, but has no qualms about advocating, by way of voting, that government take many thousands of dollars from that same neighbor. The average person will hold the door open for a stranger, but will, at the same time, advocate that that same stranger... what? So, how do I read this? Advocate that that same stranger have much of his life... hold the door open for a stranger, but will, at the same time, advocate that that same stranger have much of his life forcibly controlled via the law. The superficial politeness and consideration most people exhibit is rendered meaningless and worthless by the massive levels of state coercion and aggression they advocate. Even the Nazis had proper table manners. Say please and thank you. Showed, in German he says, bitte and danke schön, showed proper etiquette and were generally courteous. My pronunciation is a bit off there. Hey Joe! Joe put a very good link in the chat about the Milgram experiment. Go check it out if you don't know what that is yet. Showed proper etiquette and were generally courteous, something like that, when they were not committing mass murder. Yeah. There is a dramatic contrast between how nearly all statists treat others in their personal lives and how they advocate that government treat others via the law. Millions of people who would be very reluctant to physically hit another human being nonetheless proudly condone the violent subjugation or outright murder of thousands of people. They call it supporting the troops. Some statists even say that they oppose the war but support the troops. This is comparable to saying that one opposes rape but supports rapists. Because government troops always use coercion and violence against innocents. In addition to whatever defensive force they use, supporting the troops necessarily means supporting oppression. But because of pack mentality and an emotional attachment to one's fellow countrymen, many people try to dissociate the troops from what it is that all the troops do. As another example of how the belief in authority distorts perception, many welfare recipients openly admit that given the choice between accepting voluntarily donated gifts from people they know and receiving something that government forcibly took from complete strangers, they prefer the latter, because it is, in their minds, the less shameful of the two options. The fact that anyone would ever prefer accepting the stolen property over accepting compassion and generosity shows just how profoundly the belief in authority warps people's sense of morality. In short, every statist, everyone who believes in government, deceives himself into believing that he is a good person who supports good things and opposes injustice, hallucinating in himself a respect for his fellow man, while at the same time advocating that his fellow man be forcibly controlled, extorted, imprisoned, or even killed. The authority superstition is burrowed into the mind of the masses so deeply that they can advocate evil on a massive, nearly incomprehensible level, while still imagining themselves to be charitable and compassionate. They demand that government do things they would never dream of doing of their own. They imagine themselves to be non-violent, civilized, enlightened beings, while routinely advocating that all of their neighbors be robbed and forcibly controlled and put into cages or killed if they resist. Yeah. Enlightened. This is just coming up to my mind, right? The Age of Enlightenment was followed, came after Renaissance, which was the beginning of an age of quote-unquote reason, which has been totally obliterated by philosophers like Hume and Kant. They imagine themselves, I just did that, right? Did I not? Yes, I did. In truth, mankind's superficial charity, compassion and civility is nothing but a cruel joke when compared to what almost everyone will do, or what they will ask others to do in the name of authority. Alright, I don't get that sentence. Many parents and teachers regularly repeat what is perhaps the most basic rule of humanity, sometimes called the Golden Rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. However, none of the teachers and almost none of the parents who spout that rule actually live by that rule, because, by way of authority, they advocate that extortion and coercion be inflicted upon everyone they know. The Golden Rule is essentially a formula for anarchy. If someone does not like to be dominated and forcibly controlled by others, he should not advocate that others be dominated and forcibly controlled. If one wants to be left in peace, he should leave others in peace. If one desires the freedom to run his own life, he should allow others the freedom to do likewise. To put it bluntly, advocating aggression against others, and I'm inserting this myself, you do that by voting, including via any form of government, is usually incompatible with being a charitable, considerate, compassionate, kind, decent, loving human being. Alright? So I don't know if you still vote, but, reconsider. And the only reason so many otherwise good people continue to advocate widespread constant aggression via government, because you still vote, is because they have been duped into accepting the lie that there is a creature called authority that is not bound by the moral standards that apply to human beings. Alright, we've actually reached the next heading. It's also almost 5 o'clock, so should I do some searching for a poker face video, you guys? Let me see what I can get here. this one maybe? Yeah. Poker face.
Thanks so much, Nick. This one's called Dirty Life. You see, and what you pursue day after day. No lies, all the games, all the lives you wasted, and all the money you lasted. If my dreams could come true, take it all back from you. If my dreams could come true, we tear down and start again. My dreams have come true. Take it all back from you. My dreams have come true. We tear down and start again. Start again. You're sick and tired of how you behave, and all the shit that goes down there. Day after day, maybe one day you will see. Take back what is ours, and a man that's sure of help. You massive man, if my dreams don't come true, give it all back from you. If my dreams don't come true, we tear down and start again. My dreams don't come true, give it all back from you. My dreams don't come true, we tear down and start again. Start again.
Alright guys, that was Poker Face. Excuse me. Welcome everybody in the chat room, which is Captain Proton, Del, Dan, Hecty, Joe, Jules. Enter just after 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ruud, who came back 2 minutes ago. Vince, don't know if he's there. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Anons. Welcome everybody. How you doing? Alright, let's pick this up. Next heading. Quote, liberal, quote, or unquote, liberal cowardice. To be blunt, people want authority to exist because they themselves are immature cowards. Yeah, I like it. They want an all-powerful entity to impose their will on others. This takes different forms in different varieties of political advocacy, but the basic motivation is always the same. The liberal, for example, resents reality. Well, is that so? He does not want a world in which suffering and injustice are possible, but instead of doing what he can as a human being, he wants government to do it for him. He wants some magical entity to make sure that everyone, himself included, is fed, housed and taken care of, no matter how lazy or irresponsible they are. Instead of trusting human beings to take care of each other, he wants a superhuman authority to guarantee housing, food, health care, and all sorts of other things for everyone. He wants it so badly that he refuses to accept the obvious truth that no such guarantee is ever possible, and that if mere mortals do not take care of themselves and each other, nothing else will take care of them. Hold on, guys. The liberal views the world as a continuation of the classroom, where there is always an authority in charge and in control who will make sure that good kids are rewarded and protected from the bad kids. Each child is told what to do and taken care of, and all that is asked of him is that he does as he is told. Yeah. He is expected to bear no responsibility at all for his own well-being, except through his obedience to the authority. He does not provide his own food, or his own shelter, or his own protection, or anything else. He simply has faith that authorities, like teachers and parents, will provide for him. He is raised in a setting which bears no resemblance to reality and is taught to look to authority for all of his needs. Yeah, this is also kind of contradictory, right? If you expect like teachers and parents to care for you, right? Because apparently you can't do it yourself, why do you expect others that they can? Not only take care of themselves, but also others, right? Not all. And the liberal continues to do exactly that for long after he leaves school. He speaks of each person having a right to housing, food, health care and other things, as if some giant tooth fairy is obliged to make such things magically appear for everyone. The nature of reality, though it stares him in the face every day, is too disturbing to him to acknowledge, because it is so different from the world he grew up in, where authority was responsible for everything. The government programs supported by liberals are a manifestation of their own delusional terror of reality and refusal to see the world as it is. They fear uncertainty so much that they try to hallucinate into existence a superhuman entity. Yeah. They get that from that's what you get. Right? If your philosophy is flawed, this is what you get. They fear uncertainty so much that they try to hallucinate into existence. Right? If you think that, and most people do nowadays, but they're totally unaware of this fact, right? They hold the primacy of consciousness over the primacy of existence. Then you get this kind of nonsense. They fear uncertainty so much that they try to hallucinate into existence. Right? This screams primacy of this screams primacy of consciousness. Very bad philosophy. So, alright, they try to hallucinate into existence a superhuman entity, government, that can somehow overcome all the uncertainties of reality and create an always safe, always predictable world. And when the mythological savior not only fails to fix the world, but makes everything far worse, as happened with the collectivist regimes of the Soviet Union, Cuba, China, and many others, the liberal still refuses to let go of his blind faith in the omniscient, omnipotent God called government. A simple analogy makes all liberal political theory collapse. If 100 people were shipwrecked on a land, what would it even mean to say that everyone there has a right to food, or that everyone has a right to health care, or the right to a job, or the right to a living wage? If, for example, someone has a right to housing, and housing comes only from the knowledge, skills and efforts of other people, it means that one person has the right to force other persons to build him a house. This is exactly what happened in a larger context, when liberals advocate that some people be forcibly robbed via taxation in order to provide benefits for others. The notion that people, by virtue of their mere existence, are entitled to all sorts of things, things which come into being only as a result of human knowledge and effort, is delusional. The logical result of this supposedly loving and compassionate viewpoint is violence and slavery, because if one needs entitles him to something, I read this wrong, because if one's need entitles him to something, that means that it must be forcibly taken from anyone else who has it or can produce it, if he will not supply it willingly. Alright. The fact that such a short-sighted, animalistic attitude, this is collectivism, is portrayed as a progressive, compassionate philosophy does not change the fact that it is, in reality, indistinguishable from the philosophy of rats and cockroaches, regardless of who produced something. If someone else wants it, or claims to need it, he should forcibly take it. The Communist Manifesto expresses this as, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Right? Excuse me, guys. Anon says, it's pathetic our world leaders are blah-de-blah to a 45-foot stone owl. I'm talking about Bohemian Grove. Yeah. What I think, he says it's pathetic, our world leaders. Alright, I'm already stopping there. What's more pathetic is that what Larkin Rose is telling you here is that we, as a people, actually vote for these crooks. And we think that they can do a better job than we could on our own, right? That's more pathetic. It's our own fault we are in this mess. Of course, there is a fundamental difference between suggesting that people who have the wealth to spare ought to voluntarily help the less fortunate. I should read that again. Of course, there is a fundamental difference between suggesting that people who have wealth to spare ought to voluntarily help the less fortunate, and advocating that violence should be used to make things fair. Yeah. Government programs are never about asking people to help each other. They are always about using threats and aggression to force people to do certain things and behave in certain ways. But the myth of authority allows liberals to advocate widespread constant violence and intimidation while still imagining themselves to be caring and compassionate. In essence, what political leftists want is an all-knowing, all-powerful mummy to force people to share and play nice. And they ignore the fact that there is no such thing, and that imagining such a thing only adds violence, suffering and misery to society. Alright, so much for the liberals. We're moving on to the conservatives. Next heading. Quote, conservative, unquote, cowardice. As much as political liberals want a giant mummy state to protect and take care of everyone, political conservatives want a giant daddy state doing the same tilling. The results are slightly different, but the underlying delusion is the same. The desire for an all-powerful authority to protect humanity from reality. The right-wing delusion focuses less on motherly pampering and hand-holding and focuses more on fatherly protection and discipline. Yeah. This reminds me of a video I saw. I don't remember the name of this guy. It's rather unfortunate. Anyway, he was explaining about the occult and mind control. And he stated that there's a left wing and a right wing in mind control. And this has to do with your brain, he pointed out. Right? Larkin here is using the words mummy and daddy. Alright? So, daddy would be your left brain, mummy would be your right brain. And the point of occultists, those who hide knowledge, would be to get people into either one of those extreme positions. Right? The goal for normal people is to put these two together in a kind of synthesis where you take properties from the male and properties from the female and join them. If you go too much to the left or too much to the right, you're easily mind controlled because you get into a state of consciousness that is easily influenced because you're not in balance, right? This is what this probably has to do also with the way people are controlled via politics. Moving on, conservatives want authority to be used to create a big powerful protection machine and to firmly impose morality upon the population, which they imagine to be necessary for the survival of mankind. Their denial of reality is just as strong as that of the leftists. Again, the island analogy demonstrates the point well. If 100 people were shipwrecked on an island, who would imagine that forcing most of them to serve and obey a protector would be necessary or useful? And who would imagine that letting one or two of them forcibly impose their morals on the rest would make such a group more virtuous? Right? those numbers are more or less accurate. A conservative daddy form of government is the equivalent of a disciplinarian father who acts as protector of the family from outside forces, the equivalent to a government military. And protector of each member of the family from others in the family, the equivalent of domestic law enforcement. And the one who keeps undesirables away from the family, the equivalent of immigration laws, as well as the enforcer of morality, who punishes family members who disobey the rules. This last item equates to laws against pornography, prostitution, gambling, drug use and other habits and behaviors which, although they do not constitute force or fraud against anyone, are thought by many to be destructive, physically, morally, or spiritually, to those who engage in them. By trying to forcibly impose morality is more damaging than the behaviors themselves. Yeah. Those two words, force and morality, they're, according to me, they're mutually exclusive, right? Aside from the fact that no one has the right to forcibly control the non-violent choices of another, it is also horribly dangerous to set the precedent that it is okay to use violence to stamp out unseemly and distasteful behavior. Unseemly? Alright. Once such a premise is accepted in principle, human society will be a constant war of everyone against everyone. There will never be a time when everyone shares the same values and viewpoints. Peace and freedom cannot exist if every difference of opinion and every difference in lifestyle or behavior leads to violent conflicts via government coercion. Civilization, a state of peaceful coexistence, is not the result of everyone believing the same thing, but of people agreeing to refrain from initiating violence, even against people who do not believe the same things. Conservative statism, just as much as the liberal version, guarantees perpetual strife and conflict because it seeks to override free will and individual judgment with the so-called morality of a ruling class. Alright, something else I picked up from my investigation. Like I said in the first hour, into philosophy. Yet my friend said, well, don't do that, it will only contaminate your own philosophy. I can see now why he said that. Because as I've heard some of the people say on MP3s and YouTubes and such, the whole history of philosophy is filled with idiots, like Plato and Hume, Kant. Alright, the only one I still have a little respect for is Aristotle. But free will, right? That's something. If you philosophize, it's something that will cross your mind. You will ask yourself, what is free will, right? And I came across well, I guess you could call it a definition that I like very much, and I have to agree with it, especially when you're awake, as we dare call ourselves. We call ourselves awake as opposed to the mindless, note the word mindless, sheeple, quote unquote, out there. Right? So how does the word free will fit in here, right? What is free will, right? Free will is to think or not to think. That's the whole idea here. If you do not think, you don't have free will. On the other hand, if you choose to focus and use your ability to think about things, then you might actually achieve a raising of consciousness or a freedom, right? And it's a choice to think or not to think, right? So it's a choice if you use your free will or not. Now, that's one of the reasons why, as I said also a while ago, will these leaders of us, these world leaders, right? It's not them. They are not the main culprit here. We are, as a whole, the people, all of us, because we refuse to use our mind. That's why I said mindless, right? The mindless masses. Right? If you choose to not think, it means you don't have free will. Alright, let's see, where were we? Conservative statism, just as much as the liberal version, guarantees perpetual strife and conflict because it seeks to override free will and individual judgment with the so-called morality of a ruling class, whose first principle is forced conformity and sameness. Of course, violence cannot create virtue, even if it sometimes creates obedience. So all attempts by authority to coerce people into being moral and virtuous are doomed to fail and ultimately do nothing but increase the levels of violence and conflict in society. Alright. Next heading is called True Tolerance. The belief in authority is so strong that many people automatically associate disapproving of something with wanting to have government make it illegal. In their private lives, most people would never dream of resorting to violence against every person they encounter who has a habit or a lifestyle they find unpleasant. Nearly everyone on a regular basis tolerates choices and behaviors from others that he does not approve of. Of course, to tolerate something merely means to allow it to exist. To refrain from trying to forcibly stamp it out. It does not mean to condone or approve of it. True tolerance is what allows people with different viewpoints and belief systems to coexist peacefully. Ironically, tolerance is often used by statists as an excuse to engage in intolerance. For example, if an employer chooses not to do business with someone based upon that person's race, religion, sexual orientation, or some other general characteristic, some call that intolerance. Brackets open, which it is not, brackets close. And then advocate that authority use the force of law to coerce the employer to hire whomever authority thinks he should. Yeah, that's insane, right? And that is intolerance, because it amounts to refusing to allow a person to make his own choices about who to associate with and who to trade with. This is only one of many examples of how the belief in authority exacerbates EXACERBATES differences and introduces violence where it would not otherwise occur. There are several non-violent ways in which people can discourage behavior they approve of. Consider the example of a business owner who refuses to hire blacks, which, as repugnant as it may be, is not an act of aggression. Those who find such a policy offensive could boycott the person's business or speak out against his practices or beliefs. Instead, the common response to such a situation is for statists to petition those in authority to force supposedly fair and enlightened choices upon everyone. The same holds true for many other societal problems. The fight over whether same-sex marriage should be legally recognized or outlawed is nothing but a competition in intolerance from both sides. It is not justified to forcibly prevent two men from saying they are married, nor is it justified to force anyone else to recognize such a relationship as marriage. I think the whole idea is insane. You know, in Holland, when you go to quote-unquote the authorities to get yourself married, you actually get to hear the person that's working for government saying that it is approved, that you now have permission to marry. Can you fracking believe that? What is it of their business? You know? And then a second point, this whole marriage thing is the church, you know, they used to do that. It's a form of control. The notion that everyone has to have the same idea of what constitutes marriage or anything else is a symptom of conformity fascism. Likewise, obscenity laws seek to forcibly limit what people may read or view. Narcotic laws, as well as much of what the FDA does, constitute attempts to forcibly limit which substances people may ingest. Minimum wage laws try to forcibly control what two people are allowed to agree upon. Anti-discrimination laws attempt to force people into making deals and associations they do not want to make. Laws such as the Americans with Disabilities Act are attempts to use force in the name of fairness to control what services people can offer, such as shutting down a business if the owner cannot afford to install a wheelchair ramp. Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Exacerbate. Yeah, that's not it, right? The last word I said is wrong. Exacerbate, something like that. Make a problem, bad situation, or negative feeling worse. Thank you, Dan. All such laws, all such acts of authority and government are acts of aggression, the exact opposite of tolerance. It is absurd to try to force people to be nice or fair or compassionate, not only because aggression is inherently wrong, but also because there will never be only one idea of what is nice, fair, and compassionate. To have millions of people constantly fighting over the sword of authority, each hoping to forcibly impose his views of goodness upon everyone else, has been the direct cause of most of the violence and oppression in history. Though it may seem counterintuitive, this fact is historically indisputable. Most of the evil committed throughout history has come from attempts to use authority to accomplish good things. Yeah. Yeah. The Constitution of the Soviet Union, for example, described an authority which was to treat everyone equally, regardless of race or religion, occupation or sex, and to preserve the individual rights of all citizens in their economic, political, and social lives. Yeah, what do we even have constitutions for, right? The rights enumerated in the Soviet Constitution include freedom of speech and freedom of religion, the right to work, the right to rest and leisure, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to health care, and the right of citizens to be cared for in their old age, among other things. Yeah. How about just leave me alone? The real-world result of that noble-sounding experiment, however, was constant violent oppression, harassment and intimidation, economic enslavement, forced suppression of thoughts and opinions, widespread poverty, and the murder of tens of millions of human beings, many via intentionally orchestrated starvation. Right. Now, a while ago, and this just comes to my mind again, unfortunately, yeah, unfortunately, right? At my work, I have to listen to radio because, people want to hear something, and I'm forced to listen to the radio. I can't shut my ears or something. And in the news, there was this bit about something happened in the journalistic world. Because although the Ministry of Defense denies the existence of such a list, supposedly there is a list here in Holland of quote-unquote critical journalists. Alright, those that write critically. Alright, let me tell you, there is no such thing as a critical journalist here in the Netherlands. How do I know that? Because when I was, this is like 6 years ago or so, I was checking out the website of the Ministry of Defense here in the Netherlands, right? And what do I find? I find a web page about Afghanistan, where the Dutch military was busy. And there was a tab there that said, why do we go to Afghanistan? And so I click on that, and what do I get? A whole propaganda piece about how Osama bin Laden was responsible for the 9/11 attacks. Right? And this was on the page years and years. So I call the Ministry of Defense, and I tell them, well, if you have evidence that Osama bin Laden is responsible for the 9/11 attacks, you better send that evidence to the FBI, because they don't have that evidence. And the woman on the other side says, are you sure? I say, yeah, well, go check out the webpage of the FBI. Go look up Osama bin Laden and find out what criminalities he's being suspected of. 9/11 is not one of them. I say, you better, make that page more representable of the truth. And I asked her, are you going to check this out? And she said, yes, I will check it out. And I said, okay, so how can I call back in a couple of weeks to see if you've actually done your job, Yes, I can call back in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks later, I call back and I say, well, what has been going on? Did you guys inform the FBI of your evidence that you have that Osama bin Laden was responsible for 9/11? She said, well, we checked it out and we adjusted the website. Go and have a look, she said. So I go and have a look, the whole page is gone. Right? No more propaganda about Osama bin Laden being responsible for 9/11. The fact is that a simple civilian has to call the Ministry of Defense to tell them about their lies. It was no critical journalist that did that. Right? There's no such thing as a critical journalist here in the Netherlands. Otherwise, they would have beat me to it by years. All right. So much for that. Where were we? Blah, blah. Let's see, where were we? Yeah, there we were. The Constitution of the People's Republic of China is very similar to that of the Soviet Union. And the results were similar as well. Widespread violent repression and tyranny, as well as mass murder. The attempts by the Chinese authorities to use the violence of the state to reduce population growth has had particularly horrendous and deplorable results. Yeah. One-child policy, right? Tyrants have always professed to have the noblest intentions for what they do, but even good intentions, when added to the belief in authority, always result in immoral violence, sometimes to an almost incomprehensible degree. Even without all of the historical examples, it should be obvious that trying to achieve compassion and fairness, love and virtue, cooperation and brotherhood, what's that word doing in there? By way of authoritarian aggression and violence is insane, and that government, by its very nature, as a tool of forcible control, can never and will never lead to justice, peace and harmony. It is also worth noting that the political left and right are both enamored, that's like in love with, the concept of equality, with the political right pushing for equality under the law and the left pushing for equality of outcomes. But neither actually wants true equality, because they both exempt the ruling class from such equality. True equality rules out all government, because a ruler and a subject obviously can never be equals. What statists actually want is equality among the slaves, but enormous inequality between the slaves and the masters. This again shows that they view government as being superhuman, because it never occurs to them, as they push equality for all, that the equality should also include the politicians and the police. Alright, we've come to the next heading. Big or small, left or right, the state is evil. Each and every person who advocates government in any form, whether liberal, conservative, moderate, independent, communist, fascist, constitutionalist, or any other flavor, believes that representatives of authority should on a large scale commit acts which, if done by anyone else, would be widely recognized as unjust and immoral. All statists believe that the people who make up government have an exemption from basic human morality, and not only may do things which others have no right to do, but should and must do such things for the supposed good of society. Questioning what, then? You say questioning this. What do you mean with this, Dan? The type and degree of aggression varies, but all statists advocate aggression. In statist mythology, the political left wing and the political right wing are opposites. In reality, they are two sides of the same coin. The difference lies only in what the different voters hope those in power... Oh, it was another joke. Okay. Sorry, I didn't get it. But in practice, left and right politicians all engage in wealth redistribution. Yeah, I would just call it stealing of wealth. Yeah. Warmongering, centralized control of commerce, and numerous coercive restrictions upon the behavior of their subjects. As right-wing and left-wing stales approach complete power, what is that? S-T-A-L-E-S. States? No. It's not a spelling mistake. Stales, that's like a stance, I guess, or what? As right-wing and left-wing stales approach complete power, they become utterly indistinguishable from each other. Hitler's supposed far-right regime, no. Hitler was not a right-wing. It's the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterspartei. Yeah, socialist. That's not on the right, guys. Continuing. And Stalin's supposedly far-left regime were virtually identical. Yeah, that's because they were identical. They were both on the far left. Whatever the original stated purpose of either, the end result was complete power and control for the politicians, and complete helplessness and enslavement of everyone else. Being allowed to choose between the political left and political right provides the people with exactly as much power and freedom as allowing them to choose between death by hanging and death by firing squad. And adding an independent third party only adds the option of death by electrocution. Yeah. As long as the people bicker about which gang should enslave everyone, also known as democracy, the people will remain enslaved. Ironically, statists of all political stripes lament the influence that lobbyists and special interests have over politicians, ignoring the fact that every voter is a special interest and every campaign contributor is a lobbyist. Once people accept the premise that government has the right to forcibly micromanage society, perpetual competition between groups, each throwing money and favors at politicians to buy, to get their way. I don't understand that sentence. Is inevitable. It is silly to advocate authoritarian control only to then complain about the unavoidable effect of authoritarian control. People trying to buy influence. Politicians can be bought only because they H-W-A, H-A-W. Politicians can only be bought because they have the power to sell. And they have the power to sell only because people believe in government. Yeah. State power will always be used to serve one person's agenda at the expense of another. How else could coercion be used? Alright, this reminds me of, what's her name? Wife of Clinton. Hillary Clinton. Hillary. do a YouTube search, Hillary, and then space CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. All right, shows you who's in charge. Making the idea of government corruption redundant. A free statist wants government to forcibly impose his will on others, but dubs it corruption if someone else's agenda wins out. The hypocrisy is astounding.
Yep.
Likewise, conservative pundits on talk radio and elsewhere sanctimoniously chastise liberals for advocating the forced redistribution of wealth, while the pundits do exactly the same thing for slightly different purposes. To criticize welfare while supporting corporate subsidies, or to criticize attempt to legislate fairness while supporting the war on drugs, or to criticize liberal plans to nationalize industry while supporting a giant forcibly funded government military, which amounts to rationalizing the protection industry. Shows a complete absence of philosophical principles. Well, I would say shows an absence of the right philosophical principles. I think that's the one, Anom. She says there that fortunately, the building of the Council of Foreign Relations is close by, so I can just stroll over there and get my ideas of what I'm supposed to do. Something like that, she says. That's who's in power. We have it here in Europe too. We even call it almost the same. We say ECFR, European Council on Foreign Relations. Where were we, guys? Yeah, philosophical principles. I'm telling you, we are also in this mess because people don't think, They have they have a philosophy, but they're totally unaware of it. That they actually have such a subjectivist philosophy. Such a philosophy that nothing exists. They're unaware of it. There's no such thing as truth. That is the philosophy that most people hold. Unaware of it, even. That's because it's been conditioned into us. Via media and books that we read. Schools that we attend. Yeah. This is the situation we get in if we allow ourselves to be told what to think instead of how to think, right? Because we, as a people, refuse to use the trivium method, we are in such dire straits. At the same time, it is equally hypocritical for liberals to righteously condemn right-wing warmongering while supporting a giant, intrusive, vicious extortion racket, taxation, or to complain about the intolerance of the right while advocating all manner of authoritarian behavior controls. By the way, there in the beginning, I don't know if you've caught the whole show, but I talked a little about metaphysics and epistemology, right? as far as I can see, there is a link there with the trivium. Metaphysics, you could see as grammar, and epistemology, logic actually, sticks his head up there, right? And those are your first two steps in the trivium. Alright, where were we? In truth, there is a too real difference between the philosophical principles of one statist and another, because there is no, it says two, but it should say no. In truth, there is no real difference between the philosophical principles of one statist and another, because they both accept the premise that a ruling class with the right to control and rob the population is necessary and legitimate. The only argument after that is riot 1 of principle. I don't get that. It's probably a typo. I don't know what to make of this sentence, guys. Continues, but simply a debate over how the loot should be distributed and what choices should be forced upon the peasants. There is no such thing as a tolerant liberal or a tolerant conservative, because not one of them tolerates people spending their own money and controlling their own lives. It is true that the degree of evil and the types of immoral aggression advocated vary based upon the different styles of statism. Constitutionalists, for example, advocate relatively low levels of robbery and extortion, and advocate that only certain limited activities and behaviors should be controlled via threats and coercion. Right? Extortion is taxation. Activities behaved is regulation. But every power with any constitution pretends to grant any legislature is a power not possessed by mere mortal individuals. Right? This brings up again the contradiction that arises when you're talking about the representative government. Right? How can it be that someone who represents you has more powers and rights than you do? Right? You can't give away something that you do not have to someone that represents you. It's illogical. It's insane. Who would bother writing into a constitution a line pretending to delegate to certain people a right already possessed by everyone else? Right? That wouldn't come to anybody's mind. All such grants of powers and any document purporting to create a government or empower any legislator to do anything are attempts to issue a license to commit evil. Alright, it's 58. Which means my outro is coming in soon. So, thanks Del, Dan, Hecty, Joe, Jules, Ruud, Vince, who still seems to be AFK, and Tuanons. Thanks for listening, everybody. We should pick this up next week. We are about, well, not 2/3 of the way yet, but we're getting there. So, we'll pick this up next week and continue. I think it's a good document. Thank you, Larkin Rose, for allowing me to present this on the air. And take care, everybody. Listen to what Huxley says. Bye.
Opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of